We are in New York, in the consulate of the Republic of Poland. President Andrzej Duda is with us. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, and welcome. Mr. President, basically all the information agencies in the world informed about the meeting between President Andrzej Duda and the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. What were you talking about, apart from what we already know, because we know that the atmosphere was very friendly? What were the specifics of this conversation?
Na czym polegały konkrety tej rozmowy?
Yes, it was a very interesting conversation. It was a very nice meeting. First of all, I am happy to be invited because it has special meaning. It also shows the bond that connects me and the President Donald Trump. It was an invitation to a private apartment in the Trump Tower. And there, in the private apartment of Mr. President, we talked, so it was really nice. And as I said yesterday, a very nice, pleasant atmosphere, a very practical conversation, like a meeting of two friends who for 4 years carried out very important tasks for their countries, but cooperating with each other, and who think that to this day there is still a lot of good after this cooperation. Because I emphasize and will emphasize that the beginning of this serious cooperation in the field of nuclear energy, that is the decision to build an American nuclear power plant by the Westinghouse company with this technology in Poland, it was during the presidency of Donald Trump. The decision that Poland would be able to buy F-35 aircraft, this is the period of Donald Trump's presidency. A memorable visit here to the White House when the F-35 plane flew over the White House, and apparently it was the first time in the history of the White House that such an event took place, and at the home of the President of the United States. So it was a period of great strengthening of Poland's security, both from the energy side and also from the military side, and therefore we did have things to talk about. I mean, of course the President asked me about my assessment of the current situation, that is what's happening on our part of the world, the situation in Ukraine. He asked me how I see it. He asked me about my initiative to raise defense expenses in NATO up to 3%, because this is what I came out with in March, and what I also was talking about in the White House and later in Brussels with Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. And now, one by one, I talked to all the leaders. Recently, during the Tri-Sea Summit in Vilnius, I also talked about it. So these were the main topics that we touched on. Did you manage to convince Donald Trump about the American support for Ukraine and its fight against Russian aggression? We heard about at least a few initiatives, and in recent days, after your visit here in the United States, American conservatives are basically talking about unblocking these funds, including people you spoke to, people who are very close political alliance with Donald Trump. A month ago, exactly on March 12th, I had a very important conversation in Congress with representatives of both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and in the House of Representatives, above all, with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, that is Mike Johnson. And there we talked about the issue of support for Ukraine, this financial package that American congressmen will decide on. And I hope that this support will be given to Ukraine, because today, the help from the United States is of key importance when it comes to whether Ukrainians will have anything to defend their homeland with against Russian aggression, and stopping Russian aggression. Stopping Russian imperialism is of key importance for the safety of the world. It also has great significance for America, and I have explained this both in Congress and in every other place I explain it here on the American political scene. Did you say it in the Trump Tower as well? I also said it, yes, because we talked about this relationship. I said that today it is easier to give money because Ukrainians want to defend themselves. They have the will to defend their homeland. So we will have to give them money and equipment to face the Russian aggression, rather than in the future when it turns out that the Russian imperialism, as we are afraid, will spread more and more to Europe. Then it might be, like history teaches us from World War I and II, that American soldiers, American boys, have to go to Europe. And later we have graves of American soldiers who died on European fronts, defending freedom, democracy, all that is important for the so-called Free West. Maybe it's better today that the American taxpayer donates a few dollars to help those defending Ukraine. Well, what you said, these are words that have been recently mentioned by Speaker Johnson, but I wonder what he said. I think the whole world is wondering what Donald Trump said about it, because this meeting was interpreted and is interpreted as the 45th President of the United States of America meeting with the most well-known in the Western world lender of support for the West, for military support for Ukraine.
Orędownikiem wsparcia Zachodu dla militarnego wsparcia Ukrainy.
As I said, Mr. President Donald Trump asked me how I assess the situation, how I see the possibilities of further development of the situation, so I described it to Mr. President. And Mr. President Donald Trump took note, so I think that later he analyzed these aspects of our conversation. He received topics from me directly from a man who lives in this part of the world, who lives directly in a country bordering the defending against Russian aggression in Ukraine, and that was important.
Speaker Johnson powiedział w
Speaker Johnson said in his last statements that Russia has a plan to go further. He also talked about Poland, and he was just talking about the fact that it is better to finance the fight between Ukraine and Russia today than to send American soldiers. In your opinion, from your point of view of the situation, this is the current point of view of American conservatives, more broadly American political leaders?
Ja mówiłem to.
I said it to the representatives of Congress during the March visit, exactly the fact that history shows that America must finally join forces to defend the free world, freedom, democracy, all these values, which have this strong cementing character, that when there is anxiety in Europe, unfortunately, the effect was, 2 times, that American soldiers had to die. So the question is, isn't it better now, when we have these concerns in advance, when they are just starting? Isn't it better to smother them now? Because for now, all that's needed is money.
Panie prezydencie,
Mr. President, in the last days, in the last hours, we have heard statements in the Polish political space about geopolitical matters, which I have the impression have not been seriously and loudly raised by Polish politicians since 1989. Donald Tusk said that Europe is stronger politically and economically than Russia and the United States together, that we should not have complexes, and a moment later he mentioned Poland joining the European project, as he said, the dome of European anti-missile defense. How do you look at these statements? The United States placed as a rival, on one side in a sense, with the Russian Federation. This is something we have not heard in Poland thus far.
No to rzeczywiście ciekawe poglądy.
These are really interesting views. Mine are different. However, I will say this. When it comes to the plan to join this European dome, the whole idea, when it was really seriously announced, that is 2 years ago, for us it was a bit late because we have been implementing our anti-missile defense system for several years. Let me remind you that a 3-layer system, the first being Vistula, that is Patriot, the second is NATEV, in cooperation with the British. The first in cooperation with the United States, with Vistula. The second, NATEV, is a large cooperation with Great Britain when it comes to equipment, above all, missiles. And the third, the basic one, is Pilica, where we provide munition and the whole system in our own area. And there is indeed a huge role of our industry, because we also produce these anti-aircraft guns, which function as part of this system, Pilica, as well as our Grom and Piorun weapons, which are part of this system. These are excellent weapons. We are implementing this today. Pilica is almost ready. NATEV is in the process of implementation. It is coming to an end. Vistula is also in the process of implementation. So we are already advanced in this. It's all going to be connected to the American electronic control system and communication so that it is compatible with the fighters of the latest generation and F-35s, which will come from the United States, and also with other defense components. So this is a whole system solution. And now, as I have already said, that if it turned out that some added value can result from cooperation within the framework of this European dome, then please, additionally, next to this system, which we are building ourselves anyway, so that the range of this defense is even greater in the sense of long range, long distance, perhaps it is worth considering.
to jak rozumieć?
So how should we understand this coincidence? A month after the meeting in the White House, Donald Tusk meets with the leaders of France and Germany, our European partners, and sends signals about European defense policy. At the moment, before this meeting, Prime Minister Tusk said that this meeting, your meeting with Donald Trump, will certainly arouse controversy. What is this about? How do you interpret this?
No myślę, że
I think it raises less controversy than the idea of Donald Tusk. What's behind it? How do you understand it? A very good question. That is why it arouses controversy.
Panie prezydencie,
Mr. President, you mentioned the British and the Americans with whom we are creating our anti-aircraft defense system. Literally, during those same days, the attack of Iran on Israel was met with the effectiveness that we have not seen so far on such a scale. About 300 missiles and drones sent towards Israel, 99% were destroyed, among others by American and British weapons. The Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance, in its newsletter directly after, said that this is the victory of the concept that people who specialize in this have been working on for many years. These are exactly the same, or at least partially the same systems that we are supposed to use. How do you look at this in the context of things that you also talked about at the UN, because you talked about these war fronts?
no tak jak mówiłem,
As I said before, we want to use proven technologies, improved technologies at the moment, because let's remember that we are talking about the latest generation of the Patriot system. What is supposed to be with us will what we already have installed because the first batteries are already in the Republic of Poland. We have already received them from the Americans. So we want to create our super modern defense system on a global scale, controlled by this electronic system on which we are currently working on in cooperation with the Americans, based on technologies that are tested in the world, even in Israel, where we have heard many times that the Patriot system defended against missile attacks on this country. So we are talking about something that has already been tested in Iraq, in Afghanistan. We are taking advantage of what is the best in the world and what we know works.
Panie prezydencie,
Mr. President, I would like to ask you about a few more things that are happening right now in Poland. Literally at the time when you're here in the United States, the prosecutor's office wanted to file charges against deputies Kamiński and Wąsik for taking on the duties of deputies, despite, as the prosecutor's office claims, the sentence that forbade them to do so. But at the time when it happened, they were already favored by Mr. President. How do you interpret this, and what do you think about this situation?
Jaka prokuratura?
What prosecutor's office, Mr. Editor? The one that Mr. Bodnar pulled out of his sleeve? Mr. Bodnar pulled the prosecutor's office out of his sleeve, invented a completely illegal way of appointing a new prosecutor's office, and implemented it against my protests. I wrote a letter to Mr. Bodnar on this matter and to the Prime Minister protesting against it. Other organizations also protested against it. There were organizations that refused to participate in the competition procedure, claiming that it is deprived of a legal basis and that it is, in short, illegal. Therefore, I ask, what prosecutor's office?
ale czy to znaczy, że
Does this mean that we are currently dealing with a situation when the prosecutor's office is making illegal accusations? No. First of all, we are dealing with a bizarre situation today in which it may turn out that everything that the prosecutors appointed by Mr. Bodnar, the prosecutors whom he appointed illegally, that their actions are illegal and therefore all the procedures in which they participate in will be illegal. And in a moment, you will have a review of the verdicts issued by the court from the point of view of their procedural justice. This is for formal reasons. For example, by criminals or defendants, they will claim that the prosecutor who accused in this process was indiscriminately appointed because he was appointed by the prosecutor, who in turn was appointed without legal basis. This is what Mr. Bodnar is doing, breaking all the rules from the very beginning of his activities when he became the Minister of Justice with the applause of Mrs. von der Leyen and other members of the European Commission. So now we have a real breaking of the entire rule of law, and now we have a real lawlessness.
czy to oznacza, że
Does this mean that Mr. Bodnar and other people who are doing this will be responsible for this lawlessness? It is difficult to imagine the lack of consequences. It is difficult to imagine that it would be different.
Panie prezydencie,
Mr. President, I would like to ask you about one more thing that politically will mark, as it seems, the coming months to the presidential elections in Poland. The same is proceeding with the drafts or bills that are to concern abortion. Despite the full awareness of those who undertake this matter, it can be clearly understood from your declarations your signature will not be under such laws. How do you understand the political structure that is associated with this? Because it looks a bit like the topic of discussion before the upcoming elections is going to be something like this. Choose our president, because if not, these matters will never be solved. And that's why you have to choose someone who will think differently than President Andrzej Duda.
Rozumiem przede wszystkim, że
I understand, first of all, that against the lawlessness that Donald Tusk's government uses every day in all the matters we talked about a moment ago, but also, unfortunately, others, that these topics, which are to be based on social emotions, because these are the topics that are based on social emotions, are simply very convenient substitute topics, great for the campaign, and were taken out like a rabbit from a hat to be used. Everything indicates that none of these projects will reach the president's desk in the form of a law, because I doubt that they will be passed in the same. I don't think there will be a majority that will vote on these laws. So you don't think that this is a political plan that is agreed on within the governing coalition at the moment?
ja uważam, że to jest plan na...
I think it's a plan to divert attention from important issues, that this is a plan to divert attention from the fact that instead of really dealing with governing and running Polish affairs, building the strongest Polish economy, implementing important development projects such as the transport hub or the development of nuclear energy, we talked about it here in the United States because it is a joint Polish-American project that is to be implemented together with Westinghouse and Bechtel, American companies. They deal with these topics that arouse emotions, cause nerves on the stage, on the social stage, on the political stage, and in the social space in order to divert attention.
to co się musi stać?
So what must happen, in your opinion, from your experience of 2 decades, for a conservative candidate to win the presidential elections and take over the office of the President of the Republic of Poland after you?
Nurt konserwatywny
The conservative wing must choose a good candidate. The candidate must get involved and convince the voters to support him. This is a very simple recipe.
To już ostatnie.
This is the last geopolitical question. What do you know and what do your partners inform you of, including in Ukraine, about the current situation on the front? Because very disturbing information is reaching the media on this matter.
Sytuacja jest trudna.
The situation is difficult. The experience of this war, as well as knowledge about our part of the world, and above all the climate in our part of the world, and what Ukraine looks like, convince me that, unfortunately, if we expect a Russian offensive against Ukraine, and many claim that such an offensive can be expected, hence this mobilization movements of Vladimir Putin and the actions he is taking, that this offensive will occur within a few weeks. Because today tanks and armored vehicles are drowning in the mud in Ukraine, in a swamp, because it is very wet. It is spring, but when the ground dries up, when higher temperatures come, less rain, it will get warmer. It is highly likely that Russia will take the offensive, and then Ukraine must be prepared. It must have these resources so that Ukrainian soldiers have something to defend their homeland with. This is where my conversation with Speaker Johnson comes from, and the appeals to unblock the support package in any form.
Prezydent Andrzej Duda.
President Andrzej Duda, thank you very much for this meeting, straight from New York for Telewizja Republika.